Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, wherever you are and whenever you are. Welcome to Season 2, Episode 2 of The Devil and the Deep Blue Me, and I am your host, Rich Bruck. So I was at the grocery store yesterday. I know, exciting life I lead. And I'm standing in the checkout line behind this guy who's, I don't know, probably in his early 20s. And he's on the phone with someone talking about his 5-year plan. Now, I don't make it a habit of eavesdropping on people, but in my opinion, if you're going to be having a conversation in the open, then it's for the open to hear and listen to. Anyway, he was having this very serious conversation. He's got spreadsheets and color-coded spreadsheets at that for this 5-year plan. And I'm standing there thinking, man, I remember being that sure about where I was headed. I remember having plans, big plans, detailed plans that made perfect sense at the time and had absolutely nothing to do with how my life actually turned out. Which, in turn, got me thinking about this thing that we do when we pretend we know what we're doing, this performance of having it all figured out that we put on for each other and even for ourselves. I was talking to one of my students last week. She's, 26, 27, and she says to me, "It must be nice to have everything figured out at your age." And I just started laughing. I mean, I wasn't laughing at her, but I was laughing at the idea because here I am at my age and I'm still making half my decisions by flipping a mental coin and hoping for the best. But that's not what she sees when she looks at me. She sees someone who's got his own place and teaches music and makes music and seems to have his routine down. And I guess from the outside, it probably does look like I've got it all figured out. Which brings me to today's topic, the myth of having it all figured out, because spoiler alert, none of us do. And that's actually perfectly fine. Here's the thing that nobody tells you when you're young. That feeling you have where you think all the adults around you know something that you don't, well, that feeling never really goes away. You just become one of the adults that other people think have it all figured out. I remember being in my 20s and 30s and looking at older people, adulting as it were, and thinking that they had some secret knowledge, some sort of roadmap to life that, I just hadn't been given yet. Like there was going to be some moment where it all clicked into place and I'd finally feel like a real adult who knew exactly what he was doing. And then the plot twist, that moment never came. And you know what? It never does come. Or if it does, it lasts about 5 minutes before life throws you something else that you have no idea how to handle. The truth is, we're all just improvising. We're all making educated guesses based on whatever experience we've accumulated thus far and hoping that we don't screw up too badly. The difference between a 25-year-old and a 40 or 50-something-year-old isn't that the older one has all the answers. It's that the older one has gotten better at being okay with not having all the answers. I've had 3 different career objectives. I've lived in 4 different cities. I've been in relationships that I was absolutely certain they were the one until they weren't. I've made decisions that seemed brilliant at the time and turned out to be complete disasters, and vice versa. And every single time, I thought I knew exactly what it was I was doing. And every single time, I was at least partially wrong. And you know what? That's fine. That's how it's supposed to work. The myth of having it figured out is this idea that successful people have some master plan, some clear vision of where they're going and how they're going to get there. But most of the successful people I know and ones I've read about, and I'm using the term successful pretty loosely here, but most of them will tell you that they just followed their instincts and adapted when things didn't go according to plan, which was probably most of the time. I teach this one student who's constantly stressed about making the right decision, about college, about majors, about career paths. And she's paralyzed by the fear of choosing wrong. And I keep trying to tell her there is no right choice. There are just different choices that lead to different experiences, and you figure it out as you go. But she can't hear that yet because she's still operating under the assumption that there's a correct path through life. And if she can just figure out what it is, she'll be all set. But you know what? Unfortunately, it just doesn't work that way. Life is more like you're learning to improvise on guitar or something. You start with a basic chord progression, but then you have to respond, or at least to do it well, you respond to what the other musicians are doing around you. You can't always plan out your solo ahead of time because you don't know what they're going to play. You have to listen and react and just trust that your fingers are going to know what to do. And that's life. You've got some basic chords, your values, your skills, your general sense of who you are, but most of it is improvisation. And the better you get at improvising, the less you need to have it all planned out in advance. The weird thing is, from the outside, good improvisation looks effortless. And that's the objective that, as musicians, that's what we're seeking. It looks like the person knows exactly what they're doing, but on the inside, you're just making it up as you go along, hoping it sounds good and adjusting based on what you hear back. I think social media has made this a lot worse, actually. Everyone's posting their highlight reel, their moments of clarity and success and confidence. Not that many post about, lying awake at 3 a.m. wondering if they've completely screwed up their life. Not many post about having no idea what they're doing at their job or in their relationship or with their kids. So we have this distorted view where it looks like everyone else has their act together and we're the only ones who are just winging it. But here's what I've learned from being around for a while. We're all winging it. The people who look the most put together are often the ones that are just best at hiding their uncertainty. The ones who seem to have all the answers are usually just really good at sounding confident about their guesses. And honestly, that's kind of a pretty cool thing. We're all just doing our best with very incomplete information, and somehow we manage to build lives and relationships and careers and art. We figure out how to be decent to each other most of the time, and we learn from our mistakes, usually, and we adapt when things change because they always do. The pressure to have it all figured out is just another form of perfectionism, and perfectionism is the enemy of actually doing anything. If you wait until you know exactly what you're doing, well, you'll never start. And if you wait until you're sure you're making the right choice, well, you'll never choose. It's much better to make a good enough decision and adjust your course as needed. It's better to admit that you don't know everything and be open to learning. It's better to trust that you'll figure it out as you go because you've always done so before. And speaking of not having it all figured out, on today's segment of Enrichment, here are some random facts I came across this week that, well, they just made me feel, a little bit better about the whole thing. Did you know that most people don't actually feel like real adults until their late 20s or early 30s? And what I mean is that, with the research or whatever, they've come up with this term, emerging adulthood. This extended period where you're technically an adult, but you still feel like you're playing dress up in adult clothes. But here's the kicker. A lot of people never really actually shake that feeling entirely. There's this thing called imposter syndrome that, we usually talk about in work contexts, but it's applied to life in general. Fake it until you make it. That feeling that you're faking it and everyone else knows what they're doing. Well, that's not a bug or a glitch. That's actually a feature. And it keeps you humble and it keeps you learning. Anyway, here's another one. Most of us know that the human brain doesn't fully develop until you're about 25, but Specifically speaking, it's more so the prefrontal cortex, the part that handles planning and decision making and impulse control. So all those decisions you made in your late teens and your early 20s that seemed like absolutely amazing ideas at the time, well, since your brain literally wasn't even finished yet, it certainly seems to me anyway that it's perfectly okay to just cut yourself some slack. And this one is interesting. There's a concept in psychology called the paradox of choice, which in layman's terms just simply translates to the more options you have, the harder it is to make a decision, and the less satisfied you are with whatever it is you do choose. So all this anxiety about making the right choice, it's actually way worse in a world where we have infinite options. Our grandparents had much fewer choices, but I'll tell you, they probably slept a lot better at night. And here's my favorite. The word adult as a verb, like adulting, only became popular in the last couple of decades. Before that, being an adult was just a state of being, not something you had to actively do. The mere fact that we even turned it into this action verb certainly suggests that we don't even think that it comes naturally. Anyway, I mentioned last episode that I'm working on this song called Ghost of Plans. Well, I think I figured out what was bugging me about the lyrics. I was trying to make it too neat, too resolved, like the song itself was supposed to have it all figured out. But that's not at all what the song is about. It's about all these different versions of yourself that you thought you were going to become and how they kind of float around in your head sometimes. Not really haunting you exactly, but just, present. They're just there. Like alternate timelines that didn't happen, but somehow they still exist. And I've got this line. I'm collecting all my could-have beens like vintage postcards from places I never went. And I kind of like that. It captures something about how these unrealized possibilities don't really feel tragic exactly, more like interesting artifacts from a life I might have lived. And that's assuming that everything you have isn't a regret. Anyway, I'm getting closer to something that I'm happy with. And it's funny how songs teach you things about what you're thinking. Like, originally I did think the song was about regret, but it's actually more about curiosity. It's about wondering what those other versions of your life would have looked like without, necessarily wishing that you could go back and choose differently. Anyway, maybe I'll have something to play for you next week or so. We'll see. So that is what I have been thinking about this week, this beautiful mess of not having it all figured out, and how it's actually the whole point. If you're listening to this and you feel like everyone else has their life together except you, well, welcome to Earth and to humans being and being human. The secret is that we're all just making educated guesses and adjusting as we go. The people who look like they have it all figured out are just better at hiding their uncertainty, or they've gotten comfortable with not having to know everything. And honestly, once you accept that you don't have all the answers, it's actually very, very liberating. You can focus on making the next decent decision instead of trying to plan out your entire life. You can be curious about what happens next instead of stressed about controlling it all. Next episode, I think I want to talk about learning to be alone with yourself, because that might be the most important skill that nobody ever teaches you, and it's definitely something I had to figure out the very hard way. But until then, keep making it up as you go along, because we all are. And as you make it up as you go, please have yourself a safe and happy week.